attorney and a broker in California, and I made a previous video about whether a seller has to pay buyer agent compensation, and I was vague with respect to how to do it. So we're going to cover that today. I'm going to cover it from the idea that there's what a realtor can do legally and usefully. There's what a seller can do. They have more power. They're not as much at risk as realtors. And then there's what an attorney can do. And of course, if you're a seller listening to this, you could do what I'm explaining the attorneys can do if you came up to speed. Like with most law, I mean, it's really like, are you going to call a plumber? You could learn how to fix your pipes, but you're saying, I think this plumber is going to do a better job than me because they have experience. I mean, that's the way it is with attorneys. That's why realtors have been able to practice law in these in real estate home selling matters for years, because it wasn't rocket science most of the time. And the attorney could come and have authority to get things done with lenders and banks. But really, if you had a realtor represented you well, it was all good. But buyer agent compensations changed everything. The way the realtors and changed the methods and the forms, instead of protecting sellers, they sort of neutered the listing agent, empowered the buyer's agent, and they've really messed up sellers. So the first question that I think a seller would say is, why am I paying buyer agent commission when we don't even have to put it on the MLS anymore? And to me, that is really the number one question. I don't think a seller needs to pay buyer agent compensation if the seller knows what their home is worth, if it's pretty easy to ascertain on the MLS, like Realtor.com, Zillow. There's a lot of different ways to access automatic valuation methods, and they'll change, like Redfin. If all those prices can understand what your home is worth, and your home is like that, the computer number, like if you fixed up your home, you might be better. You're going to need someone explaining it. If you're undervalued, that AVM, like if your house is a mess and most of the comps are better, you're going to be in good shape. So like how much is your home worth compared to that computer number? That's the first question. Like if you live in a subdivision, your house is just like everyone else's, and you're going for that average number of a home that's 10 years old and your house is average, well, everyone's going to know the price of your home. So, if you priced it well and you're getting some showings, I would wonder why you'd pay buyer agent compensation. I can't say ahead of time what's going on, but if people know the price of your home and you're willing to sell it for that amount and there's interest, I mean, why not counter to $5,000? Like, not so the agent can't say let's go somewhere else, and you put pressure. Like, for instance, one of the risks in countering to 0 or 5,000 or less is that the buyer will walk. Undeniable. So I'm saying, if people know the price of your home and there's going to be a lot of buyers coming through, why not try? If it's the only offer you're going to get, well, then I don't know. But here's my point, is that in these forms, the idea is that the buyer and the buyer's agent have already agreed to how much money that buyer's agent will get paid if the home they show you wind up buying. So your first issue is, if you counter to 0 or less than they're requesting, there's a strong chance that buyer has already told their agent in their form that I'm not going to pay you out of my own pocket. So the agent has them on the hook for 2.5% or 3%. We'll talk round numbers. On $1 million home, let's say they asked for $30,000 commissions and said, don't worry, we'll get the seller to pay for it. So when they come over, they make an offer on your house of $950 and they want 3% buyer agent commission. If you say I'll sell it for $970 and 2% buyer agent commission, that would be $10,000 more than the buyer was planning to pay their agent. That agent is now left with a choice. They could say, I'll take the 20, I'll take the 2%, and let's get this deal done. And ethically, I think they have to do that, because otherwise they're putting their own, the DRE in California, Department of Real Estate, says an agent has to put their client's interests ahead of their own financial interests. So I think one thing is, you could leverage an ethical agent and say that we'll offer 2 or we'll offer 1 and the equivalent of 1. I wouldn't put in for percentage reasons. That's for another video. I'd make a flat fee offer of around that price to protect you from one of the issues of offering buyer agent compensation. Now, Will the deal get done? I don't know. Does your agent know? No. What the agent could do if they were licensed to negotiate buyer agent compensation is they could get on the phone and have a conversation with that buyer's agent. However, this is first issue number one when working with realtors, and this is where the lawyers need to pay attention. That lawyer, that realtor, is not authorized in writing to negotiate a third-party contract or a third-party beneficiary clause. Like this box G3 is checked in the offer, and it says seller will pay buyer agent 3%. Well, that's clearly a third-party beneficiary clause because there's a contract between the buyers and the buyer's agent. And that listing agent has no forms. The DOJ, Department of Justice, told California, according to press reports, to remove all forms related to this. So listing agents are not authorized. It's part of the class action suit too. So you can see it for multiple reasons. They're not authorized to negotiate it. They're not lawyers. And when they were negotiating it and dealing with it, that's what caused all those class action suits and kept prices artificially high. Listing agents are not licensed to do it. They're not even authorized in writing. So if the seller wants someone to represent them in that negotiation, they should have to have a written agreement that specifically authorizes them to negotiate buyer agent compensation with third parties and understand it's a third party contract and negotiating the rights and mitigating the risks. All that needs to be done together. So technically, realtors, I'm sure they're still doing it, but legally they can't. And eventually some seller is going to be disgruntled and say, I didn't know I was going to have to pay those commissions, sue the brokerage and win. Like, I don't see how the realtor's insurance is going to be able to say, oh, you're wrong. Your realtor was licensed to do that. I mean, how? So it's just a powder keg. Okay, so let's talk about what a realtor could do and go forward. I'm going to go to well, here. This is just in case people think realtors can still do this. Understand that the money, in the past, a listing agent went and negotiated 6%. They'd offer half, 3%. It was their commissions, their money, so of course they could negotiate it. Now the listing agent goes in and can only discuss the 2.5 or 3 or whatever they want to get paid for their services. They have no power, no authority. It's not within their bailiwick. It's not within their all the words that talk about what's within their category. I'm looking for, is it ambit? No, I can't remember. I can't think of the perfect word. But the point is, it's not their money. So how are they going to respond to a request for buyer agent compensation when in their broker training, they are told that they're not allowed? I have broker training. I'm a broker and an attorney. When I went to a live broker training, they said, remember, your realtors are not licensed to even cross out a line on these forms because it affects people's rights. So they can't cross out a form, which we'll get to. And so how can they draft the language related to a third-party beneficiary clause? I don't know how they're doing it. And I certainly know that the proper response, which we'll get to when we get to the attorney thing, would be to bifurcate the negotiations for not only just for the mitigation of the risk caused by offering buyer agent compensation, but for negotiating strength, for getting a higher net, for being able to negotiate buyer agent commissions down. You want to bifurcate. Realtors can't. And now I'm going to show you what a typical realtor might be doing. And this would be, let's say it was a 1.7. Well, let's say it was a 1.6 listing. So the price came in at 1.5. The realtor might say, well, purchase price to be 1.575, close of escrow to be 31 days from date of acceptance. All other terms of the original offer remain the same. This is a counteroffer form. This is the form in the realtor database. As someone who paid their dues last year, I have access to it as a realtor. And that's it. A realtor has to respond to a request for buyer agent compensation with this form, and they put it in to here. And this is why most of the time, it's my understanding that sellers are being told, well, if we counter buyer agent compensation, the buyers could walk. So let's just bring the price of the home up and negotiate that way. So round after round, like the buyer might come back at 5,525 and they'll settle at 1,550, and that's the negotiations. The buyer's agent gets paid the full price that they asked for, and the seller gets the risks of compromising the fiduciary duty of the buyer's agent, and certainly paying a percentage offer induces buyer's agents to have their buyer pay more. They could have mitigated that risk with a proper counter. Steering, absolutely built into this process, because we know the realtors, and it's the truth. You got to tell your seller that if you counter buyer agent compensation and that seller's locked in on that contract, that's if you and that buyer and the buyer's agent have a locked in price on their contract, and there's not supposed to be. I'll get into this. Like I did the research on this. I know there was some training that realtors were being trained to. Oh, I got to do this. They were being trained to lock in the actual amount, because what if the buyer only agreed to pay 1%, but the buyer's agent says, well, I'll try to get 3%, but it's a minimum 1%. If they do that, it opens a massive can of worms. Whether the contract, it's crazy. Like it's built-in criminal matter if they're doing that, because if you follow it all the way through, the loss, I don't even want to get into that. We'll skip that for now. Well, that was my other listing, another video. Let me go back to where I was. So this is the first one. This is the seller. This is what I'm calling Realtor version 2. Purchase price to be $155.50. Seller to pay buyer's broker compensation of 2% of the purchase price, notwithstanding paragraph G3 of the RPA. What does that mean? Like, how could a seller? This was an example. I had the AI say, I said, pull it off the net. This would be what a realtor would have to do. Like, let's say the request was for 3%. They now came back at 2%, and they wrote in notwithstanding paragraph 3G of the RPA. I suppose if you're the seller, you could tell your realtor to go ahead and do that. But I don't see any of the risk mitigation. You've agreed to pay buyer agent compensation. You've increased the price of the home in your counter. You still have the risk. There's still a risk there. Your agent would have to tell you, well, you're not paying the full amount, so the buyer might have to walk away. I mean, there's no risk mitigation there. And, I think it'd be better to just offer 0 if you're not going to mitigate the risk. But from a seller standpoint, I guess that's okay. But from a realtor standpoint, I'm just not seeing it. How are you determining whether to use this blank set of forms or choosing to negotiate the price in terms of the home here and have a separate contract for the price of, or for the amount of realtor compensation? Because why would I introduce this price negotiation down at this point in time until I thought the buyer and seller were close together? So for me, I would say seller is amenable to a 3% buyer agent compensation, provided we have a purchase price of $155.50. You could improve this, but now the question is, well, this is just this is what I'm gathering is happening all the time. I've heard this from agents. I'm on the phone. I've talked to them. This to me is not smart, right? I would not counter down. It's too painful to be together on these lines is what I'm saying. Like, you should be able to say purchase price to be 155, closing date 31 days from executed contracts, and then have a separate contract for the realtor compensation. Because you and the seller can get together right here on the price. The seller can see it, and the seller can say, I want to do this deal. And now all that's left, so they can sign this deal. Now you have a deal, right? I mean, what's the realtor going to do? The realtor's not going to send over a signed deal? I just, like, I don't understand how realtors can be doing this. It's painful to me that this is what they're doing. Now let's get to the seller offer. Now, I would want to have a flat fee just to eliminate part of the fiduciary, compromising the fiduciary duty. So that's what this stands out. A seller could do this. This was, I wouldn't bother with the insuring. This was a demonstration. So ensuring no conflict of interest. Ensuring is too strong a word. But I would say a flat fee was better. I think it would be, I still think it's better that seller, so I'd put this at the top. Seller hereby unchecks box G3. Seller is amenable with buyer agent compensation provided. And I'd say buyer agent fees are requested on a separate contract, and I would supply a blank contract for that, or the blank forms, or the form that I wanted, and I would include the mitigation of the risks. So to me, if a seller is going to do the work, at the very least, I'd say purchase price to be 155, close of escrow 31 days. I would say that seller is amenable to pay buyer agent compensation provided it's requested on the attached form. That would be, I think, what a seller could do. You can instruct your agent to do that, and then you'd have to create the form. And then this is what I think an attorney would consider. And again, so the price and timing, you something like purchase price shall be 1,550, close of escrow shall be. I'd rather pick the date and adjust the dates later rather than just have it spring off the time the contract was executed. But escrow can take care of that, so it's not a big deal. And I, for reasons of that, I was going to go into with this modification of terms and the duties and whether a contract's void or voidable. I was going to go into over all that, but that's just not time for that. So I would stick to box G3 of the RPA is hereby unchecked. But I would also include, and this is how I'd be running it in my office. Buyer downloads the required forms and I'd send them to my certifiedbuyer.com website or my attorney website or even my brokerage website. There's less you could do there, but like I've set up a system in Go High Level where I'll have a page, and I'll probably even set it up so that it's the house, the address of the house. So I'd say I'll pick a 7 Oak Lane, San Diego, 7 Beach Street, old PB or Ocean Beach, San Diego. And then I'd have a little explanation about why we asked the buyer to come there, that the seller would prefer not to pay buyer agent compensation because it would be real money out of their net proceeds, and that the buyer understands that there were class action suits against realtors for paying buyer agent compensation. Seller is amenable to paying buyer agent compensation, but they're going to ask that the buyer waives things or the buyer acknowledges things. And one of the things I'd have every buyer acknowledge, if I had some risk aversion, would be that the money using paid the buyer's agent could arguably be said to be being made out of the buyer's money. I mean, money's fungible. I understand that argument. Is it really the seller's money? I don't know. Is it really the buyer's money? I don't know from an economics perspective, but I do know from the class action perspectives, the argument buyers are making is saying, I thought that I was getting an agent for free, but they were really getting paid. They raised the price of the house so they could pay my agent. And that's how this worked. Right. And so, I just don't want those risks. I don't want those post-closing lawsuits. If a seller's paying buyer agent commission, if they've agreed to, rather than zero, they've agreed to some amount, they're doing it for the convenience of the buyer. So they should get the buyer to accept the fact that they're being paid out of as a convenience to the buyer or a favor to the buyer, and that the buyer acknowledges that it could be said that the money was coming from out of their pocket. I don't think many buyers have a problem with that. The next part on that waiver would be, this is depending on how risk averse the seller is. You might say the buyer realizes they could have negotiated the price of the home down another 2.5% or 3% with the seller rather than pay their buyer's agent. Like that is a certainly much stronger. Like after that, if you get a buyer to sign that and initial that, I think that's almost as good as putting a buyer on the buyer's team. I mean, that's plain words. And if they're saying, really, I could have negotiated a lower price, but instead I'm paying my buyer's agent, I think that knocks out a lot of the risk, especially related to the house being the price of the house going up to accommodate the buyer agent fee to screw buyers and keep prices high and have agent commissions too high. I mean, right there, you're saying, hey, you could lower the price of the house rather than paying your agent. I think that's pretty strong. Now, there's other, the steering mitigation is tougher. And you could, if you want at this URL, I would, if the seller wanted me to, educate the buyer about the steering process and acknowledge that there might be houses not paying buyer agent compensation that would have been suitable for buyer, but it's possible their agent only brought them to the houses where they thought there was a chance they could get paid. So you'd have the buyer acknowledge things. Again, this is something the seller should consider. I mean, if you're paying 3%, well, again, every deal is different. I can't even say ahead of time. And there are other mitigation measures, but I think we've gotten the point across that the proper way to do this would be to educate the buyer about the risks that paying buyer agent compensation is creating and get them to acknowledge those risks and maybe even sign some waivers, such as not participating in post-closing lawsuits. These are things that every seller needs to understand if they're paying buyer agent compensation. Now, the final question that I think we should address is I'm getting the sense that sellers are saying, look, I signed up to sell my home. I'm putting it on the MLS. There's a contract in front of me. Why am I paying buyer agent compensation? And that is the new reality. Buyer agent compensation is now a very passive thing. You're like, I already have a contract in front of me. Why am I paying it if not for steering, if not for the illegal process that I'm looking at? Like, why should I be afraid this buyer's going to walk? I can agree to the buyer's terms. I just don't want to pay the extra money to the buyer's agent. I don't know. That might be for future class action suits, but to the sellers, what I would say is that you're right. In the past, because for multiple reasons, when you were putting buyer agent compensation, when the listing agent was putting their buyer agent compensation on the MLS, and you put in a good number or even a 0.5% high number, there were a percentage of agents that were looking at that number before they showed your home, and they'd be motivated. You can motivate these people to sell to come to your property. I had a friend named Matt Jones. He started Favorite Agent. He had a subdivision in his town in South Carolina, and he found by offering 4%, his clients more than made up for the extra percent in final price. And he wrote a book about that. And he said it's all about showings and incentivizing agents. And he called them ethical bribes. Well, whether they're ethical or not, I don't know. And if you ask, if you went, I suppose I should. I once I was a lawyer when he was trying to sell the company. I advised him. I went and visited him. He visited me. Great guy. And he let me license his book. So I have that book available. It's like 20 years old, but I used his method. The rest, anytime I had a seller that would over improve the property, that had that was trying to get a premium relative to the comps. So we knew that when the bank approved the loan, there's a chance that the buyer would have to come up with more cash. So we needed strong buyers with strong agents. We needed relocation buyers. We offered more. We went to the meetings and I said, hey, if we get an offer in 30 days, we'll pay you. Sometimes 0.5% more, sometimes 1% more. But we got so many showings. I saw so many cold feet buyers being held together by strong agents. It wasn't just any weak agents. We wanted to market to strong agents who knew the area, who could explain things confidently to their buyers that this home was worth the extra money, even if their bank didn't agree. And the reasons why it was over improved. Like, you want to motivate the strong agents with the good buyers, maybe even buyers that were looking at higher prices. And the way to do that, especially relo buyers, I had many times that I have brokers call me up and say, could you change the way it's worded in the MLS? Because, and sometimes I had to flip it one way or the other. Like I took the advice from a Coldwell Banker broker once and I started wording things that way. And then another franchise said, well, our relo company says, that way the franchise is going to get their fee and the relo buyer is going to get a percentage of that. And the agent's going to get a lot less. So can you change it back the other way? But I can tell you that those were, the people with the gold buyers want to get paid, especially in slower markets. So you're going to want to leverage buyer agent compensation properly. Realtors can't do it. It's totally legal. The National Association of Realtors attorney said it's still legal for sellers to offer buyer agent compensation. I'm going to tell you there's no reason not to, because as long as you don't do it the wrong way, it's not a guarantee. It's not like McDonald's says they're going to sell you a quarter pounder for $8 or $7. And you can walk up there and say, boom, I want it. When you're offering 3%, if you do it the right way, it's not a guarantee the agents are going to get 3%. But I would argue that if you get your listing price or more, you should pay it. But my point is that if you're incentivizing agents to come to your property and bring their clients, if you get like 5 to 10 showings in California from real buyers, you're probably still going to get an offer. It's about showings. It's about having buyers see your property. If your property's priced right, you're going to get offers. You want to incentivize those agents. If your property is great, you're still going to get, even the shortest of the short sale markets. We used to get multiple offers if the price was good, right? They were willing to wait months for the bank to approve it because the price was good. So if you're trying to sell your home and the price is good and you're motivating agents to bring their buyers to the property, you're going to get multiple offers. And then as the price of the home goes up, buyer agent compensation also starts going down. So why not leverage buyer agent compensation? Like you're going, with most realtors, you're going to see every offer, ahead of time. Oh, that I got a buyer coming to my property with an agent. They're going to ask you for buyer agent compensation. It's probably 2.5 or 3%. So why not broadcast it? Why not turn it into multiple offer scenarios or give yourself the best chance? And the other thing of broadcasting unilateral offers of compensation, you're going to protect yourself against lawsuits from disgruntled groups that say you offered inconsistent levels of compensation because you didn't like us and you discriminated against us. So one of the ways to protect against the risk of buyer agent compensation, other than offering zero, is to make it a broadcast and do it unilaterally. All you have to do then is mitigate against the risks. Well, guess what? Anytime you're offering buyer agent compensation, you have to mitigate against the risks. So really, I would tell every seller, you're going up on the MLS and everyone's looking the same, whether you're with a discount broker or a regular broker. You want to be on the MLS. It's going to help you advertise everywhere. If you don't want to pay full price, get a flat fee listing agent Now, the next question is, what are you going to do when the offers come in? Well, I mean, I know someone who's dealing with a very slow market, but he's brought in 30 or 40 listings in Arizona. He actually works in my office, right? It's Phil. And Phil's doing very well in Arizona right now. Now, he says some of his sellers, it runs the gamut, right? Some sellers are getting ridiculously good prices on their home and still negotiating buyer agent compensation. And he said, and you'll see other sellers negotiating it down. And he said some agents are walking away when you're negotiated down to 1%, and some agents are accepting it. You just don't know. But my point is, if you're up on the MLS, and you should be, because you're getting that exposure all over the internet, everyone who wants to buy a home is going to be alerted because they're going to be looking. Everyone who's looking to buy a home now is probably going to see that your home's new to the market. So why not do that? You don't have to pay anything extra just because it's on the MLS. I mean, once you work with a realtor who's going to put it on the MLS, you've worked out your fee with them if they're going to work for you. And then you don't have to agree to buyer agent compensation. You could say 0 to everyone, and maybe you'll sell your home. But I don't understand. Well, I would think for most sellers, you should just say you're amenable to buyer agent compensation and see where the process goes. If you get a good enough price, you can pay the buyer agent compensation. So in short, for me, the answer to should you pay buyer agent compensation, I would determine what the comps were when I listed my home, what fair market value is, what my agent thought I could sell the home, and then determine what you're willing to take as a net against that. So let's say you listed your home for, let's say 1.5, and you're like, well, if I can net 1.4, I'll sell my home. Well, then you've got 45,000, even at 3%, that's $45,000 at buyer agent compensation. So what you're saying to me is that if you got an offer of 1,450, you'd sell your home. Like, you should write that down and know it. And so I would put my home on the MLS. I would have my number. I'd tell my agent I'm amenable to buyer agent compensation, because what you really, really want to do is get into a multiple offer situation. That's for another video. But if you want to just encourage multiple offers, you can sell your home for top dollar and negotiate buyer agent compensation down to 0. But let's say you're not doing that. Let's say your agent doesn't know how to do it well. They all say they can do multiple offers, but let's say they don't have a process for marketing your home, for going up on the MLS, for going out on social media and saying, we welcome buyers agents, we're amenable to buyer agent compensation. Let's say their realtor, their broker won't let them do that. You're not going to get a good grand opening like home builders. You're not saying like home builders are saying they pay buyer agent compensation. Why aren't you? But let's say you're not, your realtor's broker can't do it, and you don't have a lawyer that can help you do it. Well, I'd still say I'm amenable to it, because when the offers come in, you can make the decision. So that was a long video. I know I kind of slowed down in the middle of it because I just have so much trouble with the idea of realtors writing these terms in and not appreciating the significance of it. I mean, how could you? Well, we discussed it earlier, and I was slowing it down again, so I don't want to put you through that. But the whole idea of doing this right here, it's just horrendous to me. Purchase price to be 155, seller to pay buyer agent compensation 2% of the purchase price, notwithstanding paragraph 3G of the RPA. I mean, if you're going to counter buyer agent compensation, put it on a separate contract. Yeah, you just have to, because then the at the very least, the buyer can see you're in the ballpark with them. I mean, if you're making a counter that's in the ballpark with the buyer, why would you blow up your deal with this? It just bothers me so much that realtors aren't explaining this to their sellers or lawyers that are referring their clients. Like just conceptualize this. Instead of saying that, you're saying seller is amenable to buyer agent compensation provided it's requested on these other forms. And then you say purchase price could be like, you go 50,000 up from where the offer was, you're going to get a deal done 99% of the time. So the buyer's already like, wow, I can get this home that I just made an offer on if I'm willing to come up a little bit. How much should I come up? They're already invested, they're in. And then the buyer agent compensation request comes back later. And then you could say, yeah, accepted, buyer agent compensation down to 1%. Okay, so I'm going to do a short video on that now because I realized I didn't express myself well enough earlier. But thank you. My name is John McConnin. Now, I've spoken to a few attorneys, but I'm getting more questions from agents and realtors on the phone right now. And so, what is the point here? Well, for the attorneys, I'm trying to point out to you that if you're referring your clients to listing agents, there's so much important work that you could do that you should be getting, I'd say at least $10,000 for the work you're doing on a referral to a listing agent. And I can help you make sure that you're getting paid. And I can coach you, rather than coaching the sellers directly, I just coach you across a few files. And then, you could be doing this for all your clients. It's like practice expansion, client protection, and they sell better. And you've deepened your relationship with your client. So like if you feel, and if you haven't had enough experience with realtors and you don't want to blow up deals and you understand that the weirdest things go on in the transactions from a lawyer's standpoint. But if you see good faith and people are still working together, you're like, we can still get it done. I wouldn't advise you to do that because that could blow up the deal. Just understand these realtors do kooky things in their area. They want to get paid and their brokers making them sign forms. And it doesn't make sense that they're trying to clean up all their contingencies against their own buyer, but just roll with it. That happens. From an attorney standpoint, if you haven't been at a brokerage, it's something to marvel at. But as a smart realtor, my office once told me, he goes, you got to understand, you need fidelity to the deal because everyone's incentivized. The agents want to close this deal. The buyer wants to buy the home. The seller wants to sell the home. So there might be no reasons if everything's going as well as planned. There's no reason to step in and blow up the deals. Just let them glow. Let escrow take care of it, or call up escrow and say, see if they can do it. That's not what he said, but that is one of my tricks. Is like, just get them working in the right direction because they're, they want to close. Now, if your seller wants to back out, that's another story. But I'm saying, let it come together. So much goes on, so odd that you're like, I'm not ready to help my client all the way through this. Well, I can help you in multiple ways. I could co-list, I could co-broke the property anywhere in California, even to your favorite agent. Make sure you get paid, and I'll get paid there as a co-broker. And I can actually negotiate with the buyer's agent. They can't. I'll get written authorization. I don't think any broker in California would let them get written authorization to negotiate a third-party contract and third-party benefits and detriments. Like I don't. I mean, maybe it can happen, but would you, as a lawyer, want to help a realtor practice law without a license? I don't think so. So we can work together on that. I have many ways to do it. So just set up a quick phone call. Go to listing attorney.com and we'll have a conversation. For sellers, I guess I'd have to refer sellers to attorneys in their state and realtors, but I could make sure that you are protected, and I could bring the attorneys up to speed and ask them questions about their state, get the attorney up to speed and let them go. So there's lots of reasons to go to listingattorney.com. My name